Hey there, tomorrow is Rivian R2 day, and as I often do, I did some pixel peeping on the R2 videos that we have, and I found a lot of interesting things about the tech that's coming. Some of it you may have already seen, some of it you may not have seen, and there's one thing in particular I found that honestly just is not consequential, but was important to me. So if any of that interests you, come along for the ride. In case you're watching this video in the future, tomorrow on March 12th, 2026, at South by Southwest Austin, Rivian is finally going to be announcing more details about the R2. They're going to be talking about trim levels, equipment, pricing, all of that stuff. And the hype train is ready to leave the station. So it's time to put in the last predictions, the last little pixel peeping, hopes and dreams, because tomorrow we'll find out, well, at least a good portion of the details, and I'm sure even more will come later. But in the meantime, since I'm unable, unfortunately, to go to South by Southwest this year, I thought it might be fun to pixel peep some of the prototype footage that we have. And I found a good deal of interesting little quirks and nuances just pixel peeping some of the creators that were able to get a hands-on drive about a month ago with some of the R2 prototypes. There are a couple of different videos that I'm going to be referencing, and I'll link them down in the description so that you can go watch them yourself. They honestly did a really phenomenal job of covering the R2 prototype. So the stuff that I'm going to go through here are things that they didn't necessarily talk about in the main video. And it's worth keeping in mind that these are prototypes that they're looking at. So anything that I point out here could change between now and when it actually goes into production. Also, if you find videos like this where we talk about the technology and autonomy of electric vehicles, hit subscribe because that's what I talk about here. All right, let's get into it. All right, starting off strong, this is Doug DeMuro's video. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. But we're just gonna go through this real quick. I highly recommend that you watch his video in its entirety to see like a lot of the details he pointed out. I'm just gonna go through a few key things that I noticed that he didn't necessarily talk about. So let's go ahead and scan through. Okay, so the first thing that I noticed that's kind of interesting is right here in this area along the light bar. This is where on the Gen 2 R1, we have the RGB indicators that show when the vehicle's charging, the cool little like hazard light that sweeps side to side, all of that stuff. It looks like this has a lot smaller segments in it. So it's not just 10 segments across like the R1. It looks like there's, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 of them across the vehicle. So a lot higher resolution, if you can call it that. So interesting thing number one that I found there. And at this angle, you can see a little bit better all of these little segments here. There's clearly a lot more of these segments. So I'm curious to see what Rivian will do with it. I'm assuming at the beginning, it'll just have the same functionality as the R1 with the charging indicator and the hazard lights and all that stuff. But they certainly could go a long way with Halloween mode and all of this stuff like that. And as just a point of comparison, here's the R1, and you can very clearly see right here the 10 segments that are much larger. Okay, and another one worth pointing out, this is not a powered charge port door, it's a manual one, which to me is a little bit of a bummer. It's kind of nice to be able to just put the car in gear and drive away and it'll just close by itself. Every Tesla model does this, the R1s do it. Not a big deal, but you know, it's a little bit of a bummer to me. Another one that's kind of inconsequential is the placement of the rear camera. On the R1S, which most closely resembles the R2, the rear camera actually isn't down here on the bumper. It's up in the tailgate right below the Rivian logo. This more closely matches the R1T rear camera placement. Kind of inconsequential, doesn't really matter. That said, I do wonder if it will get dirty quicker being this low to the ground. Having it a little bit higher up has a better chance of shielding it from road debris. We'll see how it does in the real world, but just an interesting thing that I noticed. Okay, you know this little dimple right here? You know, the one that you touch to unlock the vehicle if you have auto unlock turned off? Well, on the R1, I think they originally planned on having that on both the driver and passenger side of the vehicle because the early builds, like mine included, had a dimple on both sides. However, when I got my door handles replaced because they were squeaking, that's a whole other thing, the replacement door handle didn't have that dimple on it. And it turns out that dimple never did anything, so I don't think they actually put touch sensors on both sides. But interesting on the R2, it seems that they've gotten rid of the dimple on the passenger side. Let me see if I can find it right here. There it is. The passenger side doesn't have the touch sensitive point, so I guess they're just rolling with touch sensitive only on the driver's side. And honestly, I can see why. It's not a huge commonly used feature, but worth noting that if you don't have auto unlock turned on, you have to use the driver's door handle, and it looks like that's going to be the same for R2. We'll talk a little bit more about this later, but it is worth noting that these screens are a fair bit smaller than the ones in the R1. And of course, Doug has us covered with this shot. There's a great comparison of the size difference between the screens. All right, this one I'm a little bit disappointed by. I'm going to go on a little soapbox here. Maybe it's not meaningful to anyone else, but phone charging has always been kind of a sore spot for Rivian. And they put the highest power charging ports right here in the center console where they're well hidden. I mean, that's fine. They're a little bit less accessible there, but like I can deal with that. Where it gets a little frustrating for me is these are the only USB ports that connect to the infotainment system. Meaning, if you want to use gear guard, if you want to have your dash cam going, you have to use these ports to plug in your USB drive, which means that automatically one of the highest charging ports is rendered unusable because it's being allocated to that drive. So honestly, I was really hoping that Rivian would give us a different solution. And who knows, maybe there's some more higher power charging ports that I haven't seen in any of the videos yet, but it looks like the only charging ports are the ones here and the ones in their rear seats. It would have been really nice if they could have put like a dedicated port in one of the two glove boxes, for example, to put your gear guard drive. But this is where we are with that one. Interesting note, I have heard some rumors that this charging pad right here is going to include MagSafe. No confirmation on that. No idea if this rumor is substantiated, but I sure hope it's true. Okay, one of my favorite features that Doug points out in his video is this switch that with one touch rolls up or rolls down all of the windows in the vehicle. Rivian, please, if you're watching this, give me a software version of that in my R1S. I would love to have one button on the screen that I could tap to just roll all the windows up or all the windows down. That would be amazing. We'll talk more about the software in just a second here. But just a quick note on the layout of this screen. Like I was saying before, it's a lot narrower of a screen, which means that there's a lot less real estate vertically. So instead of having all of the indicator lights along the bottom, they have them on the sides now. I think that's a smart use of space, and I think that might come into play when we talk about the software in just a second. Okay, this is hardly pixel peeping because this is a very obvious known feature, but these wheels are so cool. And I cannot wait to get some hands-on time with them. I wish I was able to make it to Austin, but hopefully sooner than later, I'll be able to try these out for myself. Okay, this is the big one for pixel peeping. There is a lot to talk about on this screen. So first off is kind of what we were mentioning before. The screen's a lot narrower, so you can see that Rivian had to change the orientation and location of a lot of screen UI elements in order to fit everything on this narrower form factor. They don't have as much space vertically, so they sacrificed the top bar and they put a lot of it on the left side here. Interesting, this isn't necessarily any easier or harder for the driver to reach because most of these controls that are on the left side now were just on the top bar, but on the left side of the top bar. So accessibility maybe is a little bit easier for some of the controls that are on the other side, but most of it is not a big thing. Visually, it looks a lot nicer though. Since this video was released, Wasim has taken to Reddit, or was it X, or one of the platforms, where he announced that this is Rivian OS 2 that we're looking at. It's an entirely new version of their Android automotive-based operating system. And there's a lot different here. Visually, it looks a lot different, and quite frankly, I really like it. It's a step in the right direction, I think. Interesting to note, though, that a lot of the changes that we're seeing here were definitely necessitated by the smaller screen of the R2, like this sidebar here, because vertical space is at a premium. So when we see OS 2 on an R1, I'm not entirely sure if we'll see the exact same UI layout or if it'll still have the top bar because the R1 doesn't suffer from the same size constraints. If I had to guess, in order to make everything more unified and streamlined across all of the vehicles, they probably will implement the sidebar on the R1, but just an interesting thought that I had. There's definitely a few interesting things we can learn from this sidebar, however. First one is it looks like there's a little weather widget here. It doesn't appear to be functioning properly, but that looks like a little partly cloudy icon and where a temperature should be displayed. So along with the normal outside temperature display, we might be able to get a weather forecast as well. So that's kind of cool. Next down, we see a 5G modem. This is amazing. I don't necessarily feel like I need the extra speed of true 5G in my vehicle. I feel like LTE, when LTE is operating well, I think it's plenty fast enough for what I do in the vehicle. 5G, I don't know that I necessarily need that extra speed, but the longer lifetime of 5G might be kind of nice. Also kind of interesting that they have collapsed all of the connectivity into this one little icon. Saves a lot of space, could make it a little bit harder for usability because you have to dive deeper for some of these menus like the hotspot and Bluetooth. But interesting to note, you got your GearGuard camera. Okay, and this is a big one here, Rivian Assistant. I think it's safe to say that they've probably delayed this a little bit because they made it sound at Rivian Autonomy Day in December. They made it sound like they were going to release it like early in 2026. And here we are like nearing the end of Q1 and we still haven't seen anything. I'm wondering if they're going to wait to release Rivian Assistant with Rivian OS 2. Not entirely sure. That could be entirely wrong. But Rivian Assistant is certainly here. So it seems that they're planning on launching Rivian Assistant at or before launch of R2. And then from there, it's all of the same notification and lock and unlock. Interesting that they've moved the settings out of the app drawer into this bar here. This bar is already pretty crowded and has a lot of stuff in it. So that's an interesting choice that they decided to put that up here. An interesting thing alongside moving the settings app out of the app drawer, they appear to have moved the quick vehicle settings into the app drawer and modified it a little bit. So this panel right here appears to be that quick vehicle settings, and you can see the icon highlighted right here. So we have both this settings panel highlighted here and the music app open at the same time. So it looks like you have your tabs that you have in the R1, this one right here that has like a mirror unfolding, folding, lighting, stuff like that. This one has some of the quick controls, like for example, turning on car wash mode. And now we have a music one that's all kind of in this same pop-up, which has a button that you can relocate this from side to side. So both driver and passenger have access to it. So interesting consolidation of controls. I really like that. You know, it definitely adds more layers and taps to get things, but I think it's more logical this way, at least to me. And here's a quick view of all of those different panels on this new app. I really like it. Also interesting to note here, this is not final software, so it could change, but notice how there's a conserve mode in this dual performance variant that they were driving on this prototype run. So that makes me wonder, did Rivian learn their lesson with the all-purpose clutch disconnect on the R1? The too long didn't read version of it is when they ran the dual motor R1 through the EPA cycle, they did it in this clutch disconnect mode. So that always has to be how it is. I'm wondering if this means that they're running the EPA cycle on the R2 with an all-wheel drive, all-purpose, kind of like the tri and quad motor currently on R1. Okay, this is just a silly thing, but look at this light. That is gigantic compared to the lights that they have in the R1 or even in the front of the R2. It's a pretty good sized reading light there. And there's actually some really cool lighting I spotted in the cargo area too. And this is it right here. This looks kind of like a smaller version of the bed lighting in the R1T. The R1S doesn't have any lower cargo lighting like this. There's tons of lighting along the roof up here. So it's a very well lit area, but there isn't any like the sides down low. So that's kind of nice they have it. Also, another thing that I noticed, this isn't really a tech thing, but they borrowed this from the R1S, this center section that just folds down independently. Love that. And it seems to have the same pin that folds out of the way when the seat is down. So you don't just have like a random peg sticking out of the side. Love that they did that. Good engineering. Another thing I love that he pointed out is this 120 volt outlet. On one hand, I'm really glad that it's there because it's pretty rare in this segment to have these outlets. But at the same time, I'm a little bit disappointed coming from the R1 where there's another outlet that's in the passenger area. It's in the rear seat, like hidden on the center console. You can't access this cargo area one from the passenger area. So if you're sitting on a road trip and you need to plug something in, unless you've already run like an extension cord from the back or something, you're not doing that. So that's a little bit disappointing. I would have liked to see one accessible in the passenger area, but not a huge deal. And I think that does it for Pixel Peeping from Doug's video. There is one other item I want to Pixel Peep from another video. And like I said at the beginning, it's nothing consequential, but it's something that I noticed, and it has to do with the sound UI. I really appreciate Rivian's sound design and how much effort they put into making it sound very pleasing yet quite informative. I think that's something that nobody really talks about, and they should, because they've done a great design on it. And it sounds to me like, just from the little like beeps and boops you've heard in the background of all of these different R2 videos, it sounds like they've kept mostly the same sound set from the Gen 2 R1. However, it sounds like they've at least rearranged a couple of them. So like I said, inconsequential, but here goes. This one comes from Jerry Rig Everything's video. Just like Doug's, I'm going to have it linked down below. Definitely worth watching. So I'm just going to let it play here.
I'm not the biggest fan of snakes, but I also don't want...
Okay. Did you hear that right there? When the vehicle's not in park and you open the door anyway, it has a little warning chime. In the R1, it uses this chime. But in the R2, it appears to use the same chime that is used for the seat belt when you first step on the brake and get in the vehicle. Very inconsequential change, honestly kind of meaningless in the grand scheme of things, but interesting to note that they are playing with the UI and improving things and making it a little bit more clear to the user. So there was the Pixel Peeping. I found a lot of really interesting stuff that makes me excited for the R2, some things that I wish were better. And of course, any of this can change at any time. So we'll see tomorrow what the R2 looks like. Until then, and if you're watching my YouTube channel, my YouTube channel, a hype train is moving. Oh, we're not doing that. A hype train is moving. They're going to be talking about pricing. They're going to be talking.